You have spent your entire life trying to be a good person. Think about that for a moment. You choose your words carefully. You soften your tone. You stay hyper-aware of how others might feel. You bend, adapt, and accommodate because somewhere deep inside, you believe that kindness should create peace. You believe that if you gave enough understanding, enough patience, enough of yourself, life would finally reward you with acceptance. But look closely at the result. You are still misunderstood, still emotionally exhausted, still carrying invisible burdens no one sees, and somehow, despite everything you've sacrificed, you're still treated like the problem. Now here comes the truth that most people avoid because it makes them deeply uncomfortable. The harder you try to be good, the easier you become to control, because good people rarely fight back. Good people explain. They justify. They apologize for things they never even did. And that's exactly how the trap closes around them. Your morality, what you proudly believed made you noble, can quietly become a leash around your neck. Because as long as you're terrified of becoming the bad guy, someone else can steer your choices, your emotions, and eventually your entire life. And here is the forbidden truth. Freedom does not come from being good. Freedom comes from becoming willing to be misunderstood. Freedom begins the moment you stop allowing other people's labels to define who you are. Stay with me, because once you truly see this, you may never look at yourself the same way again. 1. The lie you were taught to believe. You were not born a people pleaser. You were trained. Go back to the beginning. As a child, you were taught that goodness was the highest virtue. Be nice. Be polite. Don't create problems. Be easy to love. But hidden beneath those words was a silent condition. Or else, you weren't simply learning kindness. You were learning survival. You learned that safety depended on approval. Maybe your household felt emotionally unpredictable. Maybe someone's mood shifted without warning. Maybe love felt fragile, as if one wrong word could cause it to disappear. And so you adapted. Children always adapt. You became the peaceful one, the easy one, the responsible one. You learned to scan rooms before entering them. You learned to sense tension before anyone spoke. You anticipated needs before they were expressed. Without realizing it, you built an identity around everyone else's comfort. And Carl Jung saw something most people refuse to admit. What many call goodness is often fear wearing elegant clothes. Fear of rejection, fear of conflict, fear of abandonment, fear of being pushed outside the tribe. Because real goodness requires choice, and choice only exists when you possess power. If you cannot say no, your yes means nothing. It isn't generosity. It isn't virtue, it's surrender. Jung understood something modern culture often misunderstands. Being harmless is not the same as being moral. A harmless person can simply become a usable person. Read that again. Because many people spend decades trying to become harmless, believing they're becoming better human beings, while slowly disconnecting from the very parts of themselves designed for protection. You buried your anger. You buried your boundaries. You buried your instincts. You buried your no. Not because they were evil, because you believed they made you dangerous. But buried things don't disappear. They become shadows. And eventually those shadows begin collecting interest. Now, years later, you feel exhausted and you don't fully understand why. You built a reputation around being the good one, but slowly that reputation became a prison. Because maintaining an image is exhausting, especially when the image isn't fully you. And eventually you discover something painful. You are defending a version of yourself that was created for survival, not truth. The way out doesn't come through becoming even nicer. It doesn't come through trying harder. It comes through walking back into the darkness and reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned. Because what you buried wasn't evil. It was power. 2. The persona, the mask that controls you. Carl Jung had a name for the version of you that walks into the world every day. He called it the persona, in Latin. Persona literally meant mask. Actors in ancient theater wore masks to communicate roles to an audience. And whether you realize it or not, you wear one too. You have a version of yourself for family, another for work, another for social situations, a version that avoids discomfort, a version that stays agreeable, a version that never causes waves, polished, predictable, safe. But Jung warned us about something dangerous. The persona is not who you are. It is a compromise between your authentic self and society's expectations. And compromises always cost something. To maintain the mask, parts of you must be pushed away. You suppress healthy anger. You hide difficult truths. You censor desires. You abandon instincts. Little by little, life stops becoming about truth and starts becoming about perception. You stop asking, "What do I actually want?" Instead, your mind asks, "How will this look to them?" And without noticing it, your energy becomes devoted to managing an image. You maintain the appearance of being kind, fine, strong, helpful, together, while underneath that mask, your real self quietly suffocates. And here is the tragedy. The more you protect the image, the further you move from yourself. Every time your soul whispers no and your mouth says yes, you betray yourself. Every single time. Eventually, you become so skilled at performing that you forget who exists underneath the performance. And one day you look into the mirror and feel strangely unfamiliar. You see someone useful, someone reliable, someone good, but not fully alive, not fully present, not fully real. And the most dangerous part, the world rarely asks you to remove the mask. Why would it? People benefit from your predictability. They love the version of you that absorbs pressure, the version that never complains, the version always available, the version that asks for nothing. They reward your compliance because it serves them. And if you're not careful, you'll spend your entire life protecting a mask while losing the person underneath it. Because as long as your fear of losing approval remains stronger than your desire for freedom, the mask owns you. And to understand how that invisible control works, you have to go somewhere most people spend their lives avoiding: the shadow. 3. The invisible leash. Now we arrive at one of the most uncomfortable truths of your life. Nobody is physically forcing you to obey. There are no chains around your wrists, no locked doors, no prison walls. From the outside, your life may even appear completely free. You can walk away, you can say no, you can choose differently. And yet, you don't feel free, because every time you think about setting a boundary, a heavy pressure rises inside you, a knot in your chest, a wave of guilt, an invisible weight. And that is where the real prison exists, not outside you, inside you. Because the people who learned to control you rarely needed force. Force is crude. Force creates resistance. Guilt is far more efficient. Watch carefully how the leash works. It doesn't require screaming. It doesn't require threats. Sometimes all it takes is a disappointed expression, a long sigh, a wounded silence, or perhaps one carefully chosen word. Selfish, cold, ungrateful. You've changed. The moment those words hit your ears, something ancient activates inside your nervous system. Your body reacts before your mind does. Adrenaline, shame, panic. Suddenly, you stop protecting your boundary and start protecting your image. You rush to explain. You list your sacrifices. You soften your position. You begin presenting evidence to defend your innocence, not because their argument makes sense, but because being viewed as the bad person feels unbearable. And Carl Jung understood this mechanism with disturbing clarity. Because your morality became your leash, people learned where your conscience lived, and they learned how to pull it. Toxic individuals rarely accuse you because you've done something wrong. They accuse you because accusations create movement. They keep you explaining, apologizing, negotiating, shrinking. As long as you believe you must prove your goodness, you remain trapped. You think you're obeying people, but in reality, you're obeying your fear of rejection. You're obeying the terror of being disliked. And once someone controls your fear, they no longer need to control you. If they make you feel guilty for having needs, you stop having needs. If they make you feel cruel for saying no, you stop saying no. This is psychological control at its purest form, because eventually the victim polices themselves. No guard required, no chains required, just fear. But something extraordinary happens the moment fear loses power. Imagine someone says, "You've become selfish." And instead of explaining yourself, instead of defending yourself, instead of entering another exhausting courtroom, you simply respond. Maybe. Pause there. Feel that. Because in that moment, something breaks. The leash snaps. The prison walls begin dissolving. You are no longer seeking acquittal. You are no longer begging for understanding. And suddenly their words lose oxygen. Because true freedom requires a terrifying willingness. You must become comfortable being misunderstood. You must become willing to lose your good reputation in the eyes of people who benefited from your obedience. You must become willing, at least in their story, to become the villain. 4. Why good people become easy to use. From the inside, being endlessly understanding feels noble. It feels mature, wise, compassionate. You tell yourself, I'm patient. I see their pain. I understand why they act this way. And perhaps you do. Perhaps you really do understand more than others. Perhaps you see complexity where others see simplicity. You understand childhood wounds, trauma, fear, projection. You hold compassion where others judge, and that is beautiful. But now we need to stop looking at intentions and start looking at outcomes. Look at your hands. They're tired. Look at your spirit. It's exhausted. Look honestly. There is resentment there, quiet resentment, even if you're too kind to admit it. Because while you spent years understanding everyone else, you slowly disappeared, piece by piece. Every time you sacrificed your truth for peace, you believed you were becoming a peacemaker, but often you were becoming a martyr. Every time you swallowed words to avoid conflict, you believed you were preserving harmony, but often you were betraying yourself. And each time you abandoned yourself, you unknowingly taught others something. Your boundaries are negotiable. Your feelings are optional. Your needs can wait. Carl Jung confronted us with a truth many people spend their lives avoiding. You didn't become kind, you became available. And there is an enormous difference. Kindness comes from strength. Kindness comes from someone capable of saying no. Someone who chooses yes freely. Availability is different. Availability often comes from a lack of protection. You became available for projection, available for manipulation, available for emotional burdens that were never yours. And because you disconnected from your capacity to become difficult, because you buried your fangs, the world did not reward you with gratitude. It rewarded you with expectation. Notice the pattern. The more you give, the more people expect, the more you understand. The more they demand understanding, the more you sacrifice, the more sacrifice becomes assumed. In dysfunctional systems, generosity becomes normal, not special, not appreciated, expected, and eventually something heartbreaking happens. You run dry, you become depleted, and instead of asking, "Are you okay?" people ask, "Why have you changed? Why are you distant? Why are you suddenly selfish?" You became an expert in understanding people who never learned to understand you. You spent years studying their pain, analyzing their childhood, justifying their behavior, searching endlessly for reasons. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, who is doing that for you? Who is studying your wounds? Who is protecting your spirit? Who is standing guard at the gates of your exhaustion? Because while you patiently waited for others to change, life kept moving. And perhaps the hardest truth of all is this. Reality does not reward purity. Reality rewards wholeness. Reality respects people who can look directly into manipulation and calmly say, "I understand your pain. I understand your story. But I will no longer pay for it." Because understanding someone does not require sacrificing yourself for them. And maybe you've spent enough years becoming a home for everyone else's shadows. Maybe it's finally time to become whole. Maybe it's finally time to reclaim the parts of yourself that were told they were too difficult, too cold, too inconvenient, too much, because the only way to stop being used is becoming someone willing to be disliked. 5. The scapegoat, the one who sees too much. Every broken system needs one thing to survive: a scapegoat, someone to absorb blame, someone to carry tension, someone to become the container for problems nobody wants to face. And if you've spent your life feeling like the difficult child, the black sheep, the problem employee, or the person who somehow always ends up misunderstood, Listen carefully. You did not choose this role. You were recruited into it, and the reason they chose you was not because you were weak. It was because you were dangerous, in a world built on illusion. The person who sees clearly becomes a threat. Carl Jung understood something deeply unsettling. Groups protect collective illusions at all costs, and often the scapegoat is simply the person with the clearest eyes. You noticed inconsistencies. You felt imbalance. You sensed patterns others ignored. You saw things nobody openly discussed, and awareness creates pressure, because truth always creates pressure. So eventually the system responds, not with honesty, with labels: too sensitive, too emotional, too difficult, too dramatic, unstable. Suddenly your reactions become the issue. Your pain becomes overreaction. Your memory becomes exaggeration. Your boundaries become betrayal. Why? Because if you become the problem, then nobody else needs to examine themselves. Your guilt protects them. Your shame comforts them. Your self-doubt preserves the system. But hear this clearly. You were never the problem. You were the disruption. And disruption terrifies systems built on control. To a narcissist, boundaries feel like violence. To dysfunction, truth feels like betrayal. They did not attack you because you were broken. They attacked you because your existence forced them to face parts of themselves they buried decades ago. You became a mirror, and they hated what they saw. So they tried to break the mirror. And the tragedy of the scapegoat is this. Many spend 20 years trying to prove they aren't who others claimed they were. They become exceptional, overachieving, endlessly helpful, endlessly accommodating. They absorb emotional debt that was never theirs. They believe perfection will finally change the verdict. But it never does, because if the system admits you were never guilty, then it must confront itself. And broken systems rarely choose truth over survival. Healing begins the moment you stop defending yourself in courts designed to convict you. Healing begins when you realize something powerful. Their disapproval may not be evidence of your failure. It may be evidence of your freedom. 6. The forbidden shift, becoming the villain. Now we arrive at the door most people spend an entire lifetime avoiding. The forbidden question. What if freedom requires you to stop defending yourself? Think of the enormous amount of energy you've spent explaining yourself to people who benefited from misunderstanding you. Years of explanations, years of proving, years of carefully translating your intentions, trying desperately to be understood. But what if understanding was never the point? What if freedom begins where explanation ends? To dysfunctional people, boundaries look cruel. To manipulators, saying no looks selfish. To controlling systems, independence feels threatening. So let them create their story. Let them say, you've changed. You're cold. You're selfish. Let them, because a saint survives on approval. A saint needs everyone to confirm their goodness, and dependence on approval is still dependence. But the villain needs no permission. The villain acts according to an inner compass. The villain survives misunderstanding. This is the forbidden shift. The realization that your reputation inside toxic systems is not a mirror. It's a hostage. And the moment you stop rescuing that hostage, everything changes. Imagine saying, if protecting my peace makes me the villain in your story, then I accept the role. Game over. No argument. No courtroom. No negotiation. No performance. You remove yourself from the transaction entirely. You stop trading authenticity for permission. And understand this. You are not becoming cruel. You are becoming unreachable by guilt. Jung understood that wholeness requires fangs. Not to attack. Not to dominate. But because your yes means nothing without the power of no. If you cannot survive disapproval, you are not free. You are programmable. Becoming the villain is not becoming evil. It is becoming self-respecting. It is the death of the desperate rescuer within you. That exhausted part hoping, if I explain gently enough, if I love deeply enough, if I sacrifice enough, they'll finally be fair. No, they won't. And now something shocking begins happening. You set a boundary and survive. You walk away and survive. You disappoint someone and survive. The sky doesn't fall. Life continues. And suddenly guilt loses authority. You realize You never needed universal approval. You only needed yourself. 7. Psychological sovereignty, coming home to yourself. This is where things become quiet, very quiet, because to arrive here, something inside you had to die. Carl Jung called it ego death, but perhaps for you it feels more like an eviction. The old self, the one who survived by shrinking, has finally lost its home. The self that replayed conversations at night, the self that rehearsed apologies, the self that depended on approval to feel safe. That version is fading, not instantly, slowly, like sunrise. One day you set a boundary with someone who once terrified you, and instead of panic, you sleep peacefully. Someone misunderstands you, and you remain steady. Someone paints you as the villain, and you no longer chase them. You simply continue walking. That is sovereignty. Most people seek power over others, but sovereignty is different. Sovereignty means others no longer have power over you. You are no longer a colony of other people's opinions, no longer ruled by guilt storms, no longer governed by emotional manipulation. You integrated your shadow. You reclaimed your fangs. You buried the savior that nearly destroyed you. And now when they call you difficult, cold, selfish, villain, it sounds different. Now it sounds like freedom. Because villain is often just a word people use when someone stops obeying. You didn't become worse. You didn't become evil. You became whole. You finally integrated the strength you were taught to fear. And if something inside you shifted today, if some invisible chain loosened, make a declaration. I choose freedom. Not freedom from love, not freedom from kindness, freedom from fear, freedom from guilt, freedom from living according to someone else's story. Because this isn't the end, this is the beginning. This is not where you lose yourself. This is where you finally come home.